Welcome to the Basics of Gifted Coordination presented by the OAGC Coordinator Division. The OAGC Coordinator Division exists to support gifted coordinators across the state as they support gifted service personnel and gifted students. We are a division of the Ohio Association of Gifted Children. And on the OAGC website, you can find information about gifted education advocacy, various divisions, upcoming events, and information about our coordinator division. On our coordinator page, you can access the coordinator membership area where you'll find our coordinator handbook. You can preview the coordinator handbook before becoming a member. You can find information about our coordinator division leadership team, which features a region representative for each of the 12 regions, as well as other gifted coordinators with various levels of experience. You can view our region map to see which region you're located in. And you can see other gifted resources like the Gifted Indicator Calculator, new coordinator information, previously approved assessment lists, and some recommended books for supporting gifted coordination. To become a member of our division, you must also be a member of OAGC and then add membership in our coordinator division. One of the resources that's on our division webpage is a timeline for coordinators, and this has both required and best practices for gifted coordinators throughout the year. Some items that may happen at various times during the year, depending on your district, would be things like whole grade testing and retesting, various referral opportunities for testing, acceleration evaluations, your professional development, visual and performing arts nominations and evaluations, as well as when you send gifted identification and no service letters. In August, it's a good idea to review your gifted identification plan and policy as a district and update with any changes that have happened in the district. It's also a good time to make sure that you're still compliant with the operating standards for identifying and serving students who are gifted. This is a great time to renew your membership to OAGC and our coordinator division, meet any new staff members that may be working with gifted students, and update any gifted information on your district website. In September, you typically will start working on your written education plans and come up with a plan for how teachers are going to get their gifted HQPD for the year. This is also a good time to check in with your EMIS coordinator to see when they want you to give them the various EMIS data that needs to be reported to the state. You'll also want to check in with your district test coordinator and begin scheduling any testing that's going to happen during the year for your whole grade screenings. In October, the state will release your district expenditures for gifted education and your local report cards. So you'll want to sit down with building and district administrators to identify where you may have gaps in your data reporting and where there's areas for improvement. You'll also want to be sure to attend the OAGC Fall Conference, as it's a great place to connect with other gifted educators and get all the up-to-date information about gifted education in Ohio. This is also typically when you'll want to send WEPs home to parents for their signatures. If you can attend the National Association for Gifted Children's Fall Conference in November, that's also a great way to connect with educators that work with gifted students across the country. Previously, the coordinator division had their coordinator workshop in December. That's now been moved to March of each year. In second semester, you'll want to do a mid-year review of any of your written education plans and report any progress to parents. You'll also want to be sure that you are aware of the March 31st identification date cutoff. That's not when your data has to be reported to the state, but any students that are newly identified after March 31st will not be accountable for the current school year on your district report card. So that March 31st date, any students that are identified up through March 31st will be accountable for that school year. In April, you'll want to begin looking forward to the next year and designing any cluster group recommendations or any self-contained classroom rosters. And then you'll want to be sure that any teacher HQPD gifted hours are completed by the last day of school, and make sure you have all of your final EMIS reporting into your EMIS coordinator before everyone leaves for the summer. We want to highlight a few really important topics that you'll need to be aware of as a gifted coordinator. The first one being gifted identification. The state requires that each district do 2 whole grade screenings per year, once in the K2 grade band and once during the 3-6 grade band, and that should cover the areas of superior cognitive ability, creative thinking ability, specific academic ability in both reading and mathematics. You'll notice there's a star on creative thinking ability because that may no longer be required in the future. So you'll want to always check current policy from the state. You also need to have at least 2 opportunities per year for students to be referred for individual testing. And this can come from parents, teachers, or even the students themselves. The whole grade screening can count as one of those referral opportunities during a year for whatever grade band you are administering your whole grade screening in. Referral forms should be made available to parents on the website and in the building offices. And you need to have referrals available for superior cognitive ability, specific academic ability in all 4 content areas, creative thinking ability, and visual and performing arts ability. Any assessments that are used must be on the most current chart of approved assessments, and that's available on ODE's website. They also release a document called Assessments Approved for Gifted Identification and Screening, which is a nice comprehensive document that's only for gifted purposes. And so they also release that every year, and that's available on their website as well. You also need to have district determined reassessment criteria that's consistent. So any student that hits within that rescreening range is automatically rescreened with a different assessment for identification. Parents must be notified of results within 30 days, and there must be an appeals process in place for whenever that's necessary. For any students that are formally identified as gifted, there are various service models available for them. Those provided by a gifted intervention specialist would be a full-time self-contained classroom, which only has gifted students, and the gifted intervention specialist is the teacher of record for all content areas. They may also have a single subject self-contained classroom where perhaps students go to that GIS only for math, but then are with the regular education teacher for all the other content areas. GISs can also co-teach in a cluster grouped classroom with a regular education teacher, or perhaps they have a resource room or pull-out class that's not for a specific subject, or they provide other support for gifted students. General education teachers can provide gifted services in a cluster grouped classroom where gifted students are intentionally scheduled together in a cluster, but there are also other students in the classroom that are not gifted. And that's so general education teachers can intentionally plan to differentiate for those students. They can also participate in co-teaching with IGIS in the cluster grouped classroom. They could teach honors classes, AP, or IB classes as well. Some other service options would be those provided through a trained arts instructor for students identified in the visual or performing arts, College Credit Plus instructors. Educational options and innovative services are very rarely used because usually whatever services you're providing would fall under one of the other options. And acceleration is also a gifted service option, but that only applies in the first year of a new acceleration and must be reported with an FB record, which we will talk about later when we discuss EMIS reporting. Acceleration would include early entrance to kindergarten, subject acceleration, whole grade acceleration, and perhaps early graduation. For any student receiving gifted services, they must have a written education plan in place, and this is required for any student that you're reporting services to ODEW. You'll see listed what must be on the written education plan, including a description of services to be provided, a goal for the student for each service provided, methods for evaluating progress, and a method and schedule for reporting progress to parents, the staff that's going to be responsible for delivery of the service, any policies necessary for waiver of assignments or rescheduling of tests to address any scheduling conflicts when students are gone for services, a deadline for the next review of the WEP, and then a copy of the WEP must be provided to parents and any staff responsible for providing the services listed. ODEW also has a WEP evaluation checklist for districts to use when evaluating their local WEPs. For any students that are identified as gifted but not receiving services in any area, you must send a no service letter home. So That is for any student that is not receiving any gifted services. So if they have 3 gifted identifications and are receiving gifted services for one of those, you are not required to send a no service letter. So this letter must clearly communicate the student is not receiving any gifted services and must be sent each year that the district is not providing the student with a service, even if the student or parent themselves has elected not to receive the service. This must clearly tell parents when gifted services are not available, and it can include a list of enrichment opportunities provided, but it must be clear that these do not count as formal gifted service. And districts that don't provide any gifted services at any grade level still must send a no service letter. Districts must have a gifted identification plan in place, and information about that can be found on ODEW's website. It must include which assessments are going to be used for identification, the scheduling procedures for whole grade screenings and any referral testing, and assurances that the district's going to follow the law on assessing transfer students within 90 days at request of a parent, equitable testing practices, procedures for notifying parents within 30 days with results and opportunities to appeal decisions, and a commitment that the district will accept scores on assessment instruments provided by other school districts or trained personnel outside the district, as long as the assessments are on the approved list at the time of administration. Each district must also have a gifted service policy, which would include all the information on the identification plan and provisions for students to withdraw from services, for reassessment of students, and for assessments of students transferring into the district. It also must include methods for resolving disagreements between parents in the district for identification and placement decisions, and most importantly, a list of district gifted education services that are offered to students identified as gifted. And that must include what identification areas those cover, the grade levels being served, the service settings that service is taking place in, and the criteria for receiving those services. There's a planning guide available from ODEW to assist districts as well. For any acceleration placements, the Iowa Acceleration Scale is the approved tool from ODEW for acceleration teams to use when making acceleration decisions. And it has many components to it that ensure that you get a thorough evaluation of students when making those acceleration decisions. The acceleration team should include a building administrator. It should include the parent, the student, if appropriate. It could include a school psychologist, a gifted coordinator. It needs to include a classroom teacher. All involved parties should be part of making the decision. It's important to note that students may be gifted without being accelerated, and they can also be accelerated without being gifted. You can be one or the other or both. The most common and the young grades would be early entrance to kindergarten. Districts choose the August 1st or September 30th date of birth cutoff for students to be 5 years old before that date, before they can be admitted to kindergarten. If a student has a birthday falling after that chosen date, but before January 1st, there is a local policy for doing those early entrance evaluations. If a student will be 5 after January 1st, the Iowa Acceleration Scale is the only approved ODEW tool for that evaluation. Districts can decide to have a deadline for when parents can apply for early entrance to kindergarten. Whole grade acceleration is when a student is evaluated to change their entire grade level to a higher grade level. So this would be applicable to all content areas. That is different than single subject acceleration, where a student is accelerated in one or perhaps more subject areas, but their grade level is not changing. So perhaps this is a 4th grader who's taking math with a 5th grade math class, but the rest of their classes are still at the 4th grade level. And again, single subject acceleration should follow district policy and procedures for evaluation. For early graduation, some students may finish high school in less than 4 years. And for those students, that may be an acceleration, especially if they have skipped graduation requirements. Those students may or may not be identified as gifted, but it's important to work with your high school guidance counselors to ensure you have correct information about the student and their plan for graduation, especially for graduation requirements. College Credit Plus may be an acceleration, but if it's just the next progression in the courses, it may not be an acceleration. If a student has skipped a prerequisite or has skipped a level to be able to take that course, then it may be an acceleration. So you'll want to look at each particular case. For any accelerations that are in place in the first year of acceleration, they must have a written acceleration plan. And that's for any student, gifted or not, who is being reported in EMIS as accelerated, so they get an FB record, and we'll talk about what goes into that. The acceleration plan must be in place, and you must have a copy in the student cumulative file. This plan is not the same as a written education plan. This is specific to acceleration. So students may have an acceleration plan and a written education plan. They may have one and not the other. Although several students may have similar acceleration plans, the plan should still be viewed as an individualized document to the specific student. Model acceleration plans and templates are also available on the ODEW website. Some components that must be on the acceleration plan would be the type of acceleration taking place, the placement that's occurring from what grade level or content area to what grade level or content area, strategies for a successful transition in the designated transition period. So from the time the acceleration team makes the decision to a future date, that is the transition period where the team can reconvene and discuss any observations, any concerns, and decide if this is the best placement for the student. Once that transition period is over, that new placement becomes permanent, and that needs to be articulated on the acceleration plan. For any students that may earn high school credit before high school, there also needs to be procedures in place to ensure that they're getting credit for those high school courses. Staff to monitor implementation must be designated on the plan, and there must be a signature page for all parties to sign. For any teachers providing the gifted services to students, they must have specialized training on 8 competencies: the ability to differentiate instruction and differentiate curriculum, extend or replace the general education curriculum or modify the learning process, social and emotional needs of gifted students, characteristics and needs of underrepresented populations, the ability to use data to make academic decisions, formal and informal assessments, and then writing the written education plans. So who needs this professional development? Any teachers that are providing gifted services to students. There are a few exceptions, but teachers must have 60 hours in the first 4 years or 15 hours per year. This professional development can roll over from year to year. So in the first year, if you get 20 hours, then you may have 5 hours that now roll over to the following year, but that only happens in the first 4 years. Advanced placement and international baccalaureate teachers with full AP Institute or IB training have their requirement reduced to 30 hours over 4 years or 7.5 hours a year. Trained arts teachers and College Credit Plus teachers do not need gifted PD. And any teachers that are providing gifted service solely through acceleration also do not have to have the gifted professional development. After those initial 60 hours, districts determine a continuous ongoing requirement that must be met every year by anybody providing gifted services. And this is again determined by the individual district and still must address those 8 competencies. Each district has district accountability measures, mainly through their EMIS reporting. EMIS will collect gifted data regarding which staff members are providing gifted services and then which students are receiving gifted services. They'll designate any services that are being provided either through a program code, designating if it's cluster grouping, an honors class, or something like that, or if it's an entirely gifted course, so perhaps it's a self-contained class taught by a GIS, then the actual course code will be designated as being a gifted education course. So your EMIS coordinator should be able to work with you to ensure that all students are being reported appropriately. Acceleration is also a part of required EMIS data, and that is on an FB record, which we will discuss momentarily. There are beginning, middle, and end of year collection dates. Check with your EMIS coordinator when they want that information from you. All of the data has to be in by June, but they may want the information earlier on some of the collection dates. That EMIS data that gets reported is then reflected in the local report cards, specifically in the gifted indicator, which is comprised of 3 separate components: the gifted performance index, which measures achievement, gifted progress, which measures value added, and gifted identification and services. The calculation of the gifted indicator is pretty technical. So if you want more information on that, you can search gifted indicator on ODEW's website for that technical documentation. There are also usually presentations at OAGC Fall Conference about the local report card. And on our coordinator division webpage, there is also a gifted indicator calculator that is linked in so that you can see where your district may have earned points or lost points or where you can make improvements in your gifted services. The gifted performance indicator is part of the gap closing component. You can see you get either 0 or 5 points for each of those 3 areas for a total possible points of 15 points on the gifted indicator. That FB record that I mentioned is reported for any student that is accelerated, and it's not just in the first year of acceleration, it's any student that continues on that accelerated pathway unless they are then retained in the future or no longer on that accelerated pathway. So you would report this for any subject area the acceleration applies to. So for early entrance and whole grade accelerations, that would be all content areas. If it's a single subject acceleration in a specific content area, then you would report only that area. You report an accelerated status flag, which is either yes or no, and any student continuing on the accelerated path would get a Y. If a student is no longer going to be accelerated, then you would report an N for that school year and then not report that FB record moving forward after that. This record affects the performance index for the overall report card and for the gifted indicator for students who earn proficient or higher on their end of course exams. So for the overall performance index, any accelerated student would be included. For the gifted indicator, it's aligned between the area of identification and the gifted indicator calculation. So if a student is accelerated in math and identified as gifted in math, then it will affect the gifted indicator calculation for that student. If a student's identified in science but accelerated in math, then it would not be impacted on the gifted indicator performance index, but it would be reflected in the overall performance index. For students that earn proficient or higher, they get a bump for having an acceleration. And so a student that scored proficient would be bumped up a level. If a student scored advanced on their test, they actually would get bumped up to a additional category called advanced plus and get that additional weight up to 1.3 for the PI calculation. If you want more information, ODEW's website has lots of information about gifted education, or you can visit the local report card website to get information specifically on those calculations. If you have any other questions, feel free to reach out to OAGC leadership, and anyone on the coordinator division leadership team would be happy to help answer any questions that you may have.